Force Gaming is summarizing very interesting the premise of Dune Awakening, the whole MMO updates that they were talking about. And also, I'm kind of curious if he has some info on the topic, if servers will be private, if silver servers will be public, if we can make our own server styles. As I just mentioned earlier, I would like to do a content creator server where we roleplay and plan out all kinds of interesting premises and situations for you guys to experience and watch, and maybe even take part in it. And yeah, let's have a look what Force Gaming is saying about Dune Awakening.
As some of you likely know by now, I have a problem. I am unreasonably excited for the upcoming open world survival MMO Dune Awakening. Been talking about this game for well over a year now, and as we continue to inch closer to its release, my excitement has just been growing. Yes, I know the game is going to have issues, chief amongst those being the rather janky looking combat, and what I'm expecting to...
It is kind of janky looking. Feels a little bit like they were trying to take the model from Conan Exiles and implemented it over here. But then again, it's not the final product. I think we're getting early access, right? Are we getting a full game? Maybe somebody can clue me up either here live in chat or in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube later on. Full game is coming out, not early access. Well, then I hope Comet gets a little bit of an overhaul to be more good. Good morning, boys and girls. Super Richie, how you? Adieu, you going already?
To be poor performance, most likely, be that client side or server side, either or really, or maybe both, who knows. Despite those things, I'm still pumped to play the game. In fact, the more I see, the more I'm looking forward to it. There is a lot here.
I'm highly terrified of that sandworms. Playing Wordle? Gotcha, Super Richie. Fun times with it. I wonder how big the whole group premise will be. Like, if you're going for PvP, are we talking about massive battles, multiple entities, or are we talking about small skirmishes, 5v5 and whatnot? But overall, this whole desert planet exploration spiel is highly intriguing. I personally hope that we are getting an clever NPC faction that becomes a third party, a third threat and entity that on its own explores, expands, maybe even with some, dungeon master / game master help, is creating new bases. So maybe even Funcom has the time to hire a few dedicated people who are, forcing the expanse of a neutral, non-player entity to expand and threaten, so that players have to bind together to deal with it. Mortal Online, the first one, had this premise a little bit. Sadly, poorly executed in terms of holding up rules and griefing and other shenanigans. But overall, they had a very interesting premise of putting in an NPC enemy faction that on its own started to build bases, outposts, expand, and become more and more a threat to the player base. And the players have to, act accordingly. And it would be cool to see that. Not to only emphasize on PvP, but also going into having an active, breathing NPC enemy that the players bind together. Because I think a co-op premise always creates more community, always creates more come together. And PvP is always, sadly, very often leading towards a more toxic environment because people don't have the sportsmanship that early gaming was nowadays, that everybody has access. And yeah, I'm curious. Steph, how you doing? Welcome in.
That I like. No, it won't be perfect, but I'm expecting to have quite a lot of fun regardless. And that's why I play video games after all. If I'm having fun, I'm happy. All right, so just the other day, Funcom held a massive 2-hour live stream. This thing was a honker with loads of new information, gameplay, and some interesting things both shown and discussed. This was the biggest reveal that they've done to date, and there's quite a lot here, so Let's dive in. After a bit of an introduction and showcasing some previously released trailers, they then kicked things off with a live gameplay session where a host joined by two developers, the world director and environmental artist, talked through most of the experience, kind of detailing and sharing some information. Now, one of the
animation still looks a little bit wonky, if you ask me. Going back at how she's passing through the sand over here. We'll see. We'll see if it delivers a nice experience. Could be a shield. That's definitely some sort of heat shield, probably, or the shield that they have in general. I forgot the terminology for it. There's a specific word for it. We see that force shields very often in the new Dune movies happening. So, yeah. Good morning, Attila. How you doing? Welcome in. Multiplayer has been always toxic, says Panavision. I have to disagree. I'm coming from a competition part where we played up to Counter-Strike 1.6. That's why I kind of like stepped out from the FPS genre. But we had still the sportsmanship. Even if we lost or something like that, there was a proper handshake. There was like a good GG, good game. And we accepted defeat and tried to learn from what we did wrong. Now it is, I don't know, cussing, insulting your mother and your ancestors if something goes wrong in multiplayer. It's very childish behavior. And yeah, maybe I'm just old. Maybe I'm just old and I just want to have a friendly PvP match where people shake their hands afterwards and be like, hey, thanks for the good time and for the challenge. And yeah, Short Wolf, shut up. You're old. How you doing? Welcome in.
Talked through most of the experience, kind of detailing and sharing some information. Now, one of the first topics that they addressed here was the setting, the fact that this is set in the desert and how they are managing to try to make that less boring and be more than just like walking through vast swaths of sand and trying to keep exploration interesting. So the main takeaway here is they really focus on verticality as well as having lots of interesting vistas and points of interest. And that is in addition to having different varied areas, namely the testing stations and other points of interest that are going to help mix up the visual variety as well. We're going to see some more examples of that shortly here. While exploring, they pointed out that while you scout with binoculars, it's actually going to automatically add any points of interest that you scan right onto your map, as well as onto the compass at the top of the UI. Plus,
okay, I find this premise quite interesting for exploration. What would be cool is if you are in a group or if you are in a guild, that there maybe is a station, like, I don't know, let's call it the map. And while your guilds or your friends or as a group, you are exploring, you can share your found locations. You can share whatever you have uncovered and whatnot. And you know, talk with the guild, plan with the guild, and be like, hey, I found this hideout over here. Mark it. See, everybody sees the marker. In plan, I don't know, a raid, or if it's a dungeon, find a dungeon entrance to plan that. And I've kind of like a shared communal thing, because it very much feels like the emphasis is more going towards playing with others than playing on your own. One Cosmos, how you doing? Welcome in. You're old, Dragon Lady? I agree. What up, Corb? That has been lining up. Hope you has been well. It's been, yeah, that's true. Also been playing a game I can't talk about lately. What I will say, I've pre-ordered Dune Awakening. You've played a game you're not allowed to talk about? Just tell the game. That's okay. You don't have to give us the details. Just let us die in envy that you're playing a game that we probably don't have access to. Funny that I mentioned that? Tell me more, Attila. Tell me more. Let's go on here a little bit until Ursula
they mentioned the fact that you can place down your own custom markers. If you happen to come across, say, like a hidden treasure chest, you can mark it there for future reference as well. Now, next, we walked up to a trading post, the one that they previously scouted out. Now, we have seen these trading posts in prior gameplay reveals. They are relatively small locations in which you're going to find various NPCs you can buy and sell things from. You can pick up new quests. Specifically, these are called contracts, and they...
Oh, we have quest boards that we can grab? That's fantastic.
function sort of like area bounties or quest within a region where you have to complete some objective nearby and you're given rewards. We were also shown these ornithopter pilots. These are used for fast traveling between trading posts that you've previously unlocked in a region, and it's going to be a way to access one of the two game's major cities. And you're also going to tend to see other players here as well, because there's going to be people concentrating in this area to pick up contracts, to trade with NPCs, or to go to those ornithopter pilots. Now, at the same time that they arrived at this trading post, one of those dynamic sandstorms were rolling in, and this was really cool because you could see it coming in from the distance, and then as it approached, the doors to the trading post actually started slowly physically closing in order to protect the players inside from the bypassing storm, because if you're stuck out in the storm, it is going to kill you. So it's something you actually have to physically take shelter from. Now, I will note that the storm blew over fairly quickly as the doors opened again about like 1 minute later. Ever since they first revealed these...
Who trapped them? Imagine it being a PvP zone. But yeah, I don't think that would be a thing. It's probably in safe zone, just to be able to run into if a sandstorm comes up. So I wonder if the exploitation of these trading posts might not be too strong, that people are not, building their base whatsoever and just run into those trading zones for cover and then come back out again. But that opens up also a different pathway of playing it. You're in Endless Legend 2 beta, Dragon Lady. Can you DM me how to do that? I would love to be able to join that as well.
Storms, I thought it was a pretty neat system, and it's cool to see like the world reacting to it. The fact that the doors physically close shut to protect you inside, or if you have your own base set up, those bases are shielded, so being inside those will protect you from the storm as well.
In other words, immersion. I love when game goes into the immersion part and probably trying to drag you into the situation. And then if the buildings around you react to the upcoming threats, I'm curious if early buildings will do that automatically, or if you have to panically close everything when it happens.
Or you can even like enter cave systems or subterranean layers. That will be other ways for you to get out of a storm so you don't die as a result. So once the storm passed, they then left the trading post and walked to the player's base, which was right nearby. And in here we see various crafting and refining stations, along with some item storage containers and some decorations all about. In here they converted some of the blood that they'd collected into water. Again, this is part of the hydration system. You've got to stay hydrated as one of your survival mechanics. And after that was done, they then hopped onto the back of a sand bike. So the sand bike is basically going to be your first early game vehicle. It's going to be one of the first things you can craft, and it lets you quickly traverse the sands to cover larger distances.
I love already the feel of how it tilts its left and right a little bit. If I had to guess, I'd say it probably configurable in your own base. Probably. Speaking of hydration, thank you, Tariq. Letting me hydrate.
That you wouldn't be able to otherwise do on foot, because the sandworm would appear and kill you before you can make it across. So the sand bike is a key component to part of like sort of the progression through the first zone of Haga Basin. So they rode the bike to a nearby NPC called Derek Tsinara. This is a planetologist, and it's one of the NPCs in the game that actually unlocks additional skill trees, although I'm not sure which skill tree it unlocks. Maybe there's a planetology skill tree, I don't know. But basically this plays into the class system. So the way it works is when you start the game, you're going to pick a class for your character. The four initial options being Swordmaster, Bene Gesserit, Trooper, and Mentat. And then that chosen class is going to determine the skill tree you begin with, as well as what active skills you initially unlock. However, as you play through the game, you can unlock any and all of the additional skill trees in the game. Although you can only have 2 active skills at a time, you'll be getting passive boost in those trees, as well as just the ability to swap which active skills you want based on the things that you've unlocked. And you do that by basically completing quest chains for NPCs like the one that they're visiting here, this planetologist Derek. So after visiting that NPC, they then jumped onto their sand bike and headed out again, crossing over this large expanse of sand. While doing so, we actually see one of those security drop ships off in the background. These are the ones that scan the surface of the planet side at night. And they mentioned here that if one of these spots you with their massive lights, it's actually going to temporarily temporarily stun you if you get spotted, and then they send in these mercenary troops to attack you. So I didn't realize in the past that it's actually a form of CC as well if you get spotted by one of those lights. So that was just...
So there we have already an aggressive enemy entity that is non-player based, moving around and dealing and being a threat. Next level, as mentioned earlier, would be if those mercenaries or whatever faction actually builds their own bases and becomes a living enemy entity going against the player. And because that premise alone, if we then have maybe private service that we can set up and configure, would be able to adjust it into a threat level that we as the player base always have something to do and are keeping busy and have to, you know, hide from them or maintain our borders or something like that, to have the urge of replayability, the urge of logging in again, play a little bit, do something for the guild, and help expanding or help maintaining the borders, or help fighting or whatever it is, or go into territory for specific spice raids. You know, I think it will bring in a nice dynamic if they manage to pull that off.
Just a neat additional detail. They continue to drive on the sands until eventually a worm emerges. Now, this is going to happen anytime you spend too much time in these open sandy areas. There's a vibration meter that tells you how much of a disturbance you've made. If you make enough, eventually the worm is going to emerge and start chasing you. And when they arrive, you have to get off the sands, because if they chase you and catch up to you, they will kill you. What you have to do is just look for any of these nearby rocky formations. Basically, if you see rocks, head to the rocks, because the worm can't go to that rocky ground. They can only move amongst the actual soft sand. So they drive for a little while longer until they eventually arrive at one of the major points of interest within Haga Basin, called the Western Vermilius Gap. Now, after getting off the bike, we actually see the player swap out their skills. They exchange the Shiga wire cable, like the grapple hook, for the Compel ability, which pulls distant targeted enemies towards you. And then they swap out their Charge Sprint ability for Sentinel, which is just a turret you place in the ground that does ranged attacks. After this point, the player begins scouting out the enemy camp, and here the host discuss the fact that they're going to be different camps that have different themes as well as visuals based on the faction of NPCs that inhabit that area. Now, I believe this particular...
And apparently NPCs that are not having a good pathfinding, because I saw that one was walking into the wall.
Other point of interest that they've arrived at is a scavenger base, although I'm not certain. And then finally, after this, we get a look at some combat. The player approaches the enemy base, engages with some enemies using their two new abilities, the ranged pull as well as the turret, shooting.
I was just running towards you.
Attacks. And hey, you know what? Combat still looks rough. There's no denying that. The animations are quite stiff here. It doesn't really look like it's much improved since the last time we saw it. As I've mentioned in the past, though, stiff and janky animations are pretty par for the course in most every survival game I've ever played, and it hasn't stopped me in the past from enjoying this genre. In fact,
true. I think the one that looks most fluid is Enshrouded. And for those unaware, you do not want the worm to get to you, because whatever you carry is kept in your frame kit, and you won't get that back when it's in the worm's belly. Oh, so the worm is kind of like an entity that completely devours whatever it gets hold on to, and you lose whatever you... Oh, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting, and brings even more dread and fear to the worm. I like that. Oh my goodness. Imagine you're on an important resource run, and you're on the way back, and are getting into the worm's way, or the worm comes into your way. I wonder in PvP zones if you could use or trigger the worm to your advantage in order to call him in. For example, if there's like these spice raids that I saw where there's like a big fluctuation of spice, and where you collect high amount of it, and they call it a PvP zone. If you could use thumpers to drag in, exactly, Cosmos, thumpers. If you could use thumpers to, if you are in a loss, or in a situation where you're like, okay, I'm not getting anything out of it, but you won't either, and then trigger thumper.
Survival is one of my favorite genres next to MMOs, in spite of its shortcomings. But yeah, I mean, I can't deny the combat here doesn't look great, that is for sure. I'm hoping it's still fun to play.
Combat looks actually bad, to be honest. You think it will be craftable? Either craftable, but I hope there is kind of like a very rare resource, or very rare to get your hands on the thumpers.
As I have had loads of fun playing other survival games with janky combat, so I'm hoping that's the case here as well. In fact, they do directly address the look of combat, saying that they will talk about it more in the future, but they're not doing it here in this stream. They're going to have a separate stream entirely focused on combat. So that means, I presume, that they are at least aware of it and planning to make some improvements. However further that takes it from its current iteration, I don't know, but it doesn't really look great at the moment. That aside, I gotta say though, this clearing enemy camps is one of my favorite things in these kinds of games. I just love it. Going in, killing all the enemies, opening the chest, collecting the treasures inside. This looks fun to me, especially in this massive open world with other players running around and you being able to do this stuff with your friends. It looks great. I can't wait to do it. The look of the combat aside. They also mention here that there's a lot of hidden areas all throughout the game, and we actually see an example of one of these with the player smashing through this barrier and revealing on the other side a cave with enemies and loot inside. Love it. Love to see it. Hope there's lots of this. Upon exiting the cave, the player does some harvesting. Now, we've seen this quite a bit in the past, but TLDR is you use a scanner and it reveals a weak points along the object, which you have to physically trace the line. Well, you don't have to, but doing so gives you bonus resources, so it's highly encouraged, basically. And then just around the corner from this area, the player then enters one of their other bases, so it's interesting to note that you can actually have multiple bases apparently in the game. This one was much more elaborate.
I mean, it's nearly in every survival game that you could do that, unless they are based on some sort of like claim the plots tile or something like that. I just have 7 Days to Die in my head right now. We have like a claim block that you set down, and then you can build around it. And I'm not sure you could have multiple of those, but they're quite difficult to build in order to make a second base, so to say. But for Nexels, you could build wherever you want to. You only had the decaying thing that if a building was not really used a lot, it started to decay, and you'd had to repair it.
Multi-leveled with a ton of different stations and decorations inside. It's here we see the player bugging out as they try to climb this ladder. I expect we're going to see lots of similar things in this game. Again, kind of par for the course for survival games. So yeah, I'm expecting to see some buggy, janky animations, getting stuck on terrain and stuff like that. It's going to happen. After walking through the base a bit, they then hop into an ornithopter, which is a major vehicle and like a milestone moment in this game. This is what you need to actually get into the end game, which is the deep desert region. Now, from what I understand, crafting the first ornithopter is going to take a while, upwards of 50 plus hours before you progress far enough and have the resources in order to make one. But also they are multiplayer vehicles with a lot of capacity. So if one person in your friend groups makes an ornithopter, you all can make use of it essentially, either to get around in Haga Basin or to leave Haga Basin to head towards the end game. So they fly around in the ornithopter for a while. They fly over this hole in the ground, which they said is one of the desert testing station locations. Now, these desert testing stations are basically Dune Awakening's version of dungeons, akin to things like the shelters in Fallout or the dungeons in Skyrim, like enemy strongholds, but underground, filled with a ton of enemies and a lot more visual variety as well, as these testing stations have a lot of science and supernatural elements. So you're going to see different plant life and different ecosystems down here. We've seen quite a few examples of this in prior gameplay videos, and this is like the major way they're adding visual variety to the game beyond the sand-swept planet surface up above. Now, I'll also point out in this section of the walkthrough, it looks like you've got full and total freedom once you are in an ornithopter. Like, we see them flying all the way up high into the skybox and landing on this massive stone structure high up in the sky. So once you have one of these, it does seem like you're going to be able to free to go pretty much anywhere you want.
What if we can build up here?
Aside, of course, but yeah, it looks like you could just fly anywhere within the world once you have an ornithopter, which is pretty cool. Now, while they were atop the stone structure, we see a spice blow, massive spice blow pop pop up, and this is where players are going to go to harvest spice, which is the game's most valuable and sought after endgame resource. It's supposedly used to fuel high-end crafting as well as player power progression. Also, while up here, they show us the location of one of the many secret hidden treasure chests in the world, like the ones in the caves that we saw earlier. The game is apparently going to have these sorts of treasures all over the place, and they're definitely worth looking for, as what you get inside is highly valuable. In this particular one, they find a purple unique schematic for crafting some good gear. While they're up here, they then use a survey probe. This is something that you shoot up into the air, and it basically marks any major resources place. It just looks so damn cool, both visually, but also just from the perspective of exploration. Like, I can imagine coming here on foot and then traversing down with how big this thing is, fighting enemies in between and searching for chests and finding different resources. Like, the whole thing seems like it could be a ton of fun and just add some interesting immersion and exploration stuff. Like, I love this stuff. I think this looks awesome. After spending,
I wonder if the environment per se is workable, like in Shrouded, that you can just dig through and make your own path, or everything is like set in stone and only specific nodes are mineable or terraformable, or, you know, in any ways interactable like that. Thank you for the welcome back.
a little time in the canyon and then leave and fly to a nearby shipwreck. And this is, as it sounds, the remains of a large crashed ship. They are similar to things like enemy strongholds in that you're going to have to fight back groups of PvE enemies, clearing the area and then collecting any loot that you find. But also they told us that every shipwreck in the game is a PvP area as well. So other players who are here can freely attack you. Now this is going to be a trade-off for the fact that these areas have highly valuable loot found within them. And personally, I'm a big fan of these sort of mechanics and these kinds of spaces in MMOs, having these particular zones or points of interest that are PvP flagged within a vicinity. I just think it adds an extra layer of tension to
watch people sitting there just camping, waiting for people to come in and sneak up on them and attack them for the sake of, haha, I can do that. I can be a little campy brick.
Exploring this and just to the entire world that I really enjoy.
Coming back to Panda's Vision mentioned that he got a completely different experience and agrees to disagree. That's totally fair. That's totally fair. I come from an rookie esports zone where we had quite a lot of sportsmanship and good behavior that we brought to the table. And I think online games should be very strict about people not behaving correctly, because that would enforce good behavior and enforce the lowering of toxicity behavior and wording and whatnot. That's my opinion. Of course, people do love to rage. People do love to watch people who rage, and people love drama in general. So probably it's wishful thinking that will never happen.
So can't wait.
Dennis, welcome in.
They also mention here as well that the different points of interest in the game, beyond dropping just from like a basic loot table, each specific area will also drop items for particular parts of progression. So for example, shipwrecks like this one will be dropping items tailored towards weapon crafting at higher rates, whereas testing stations, those dungeons we mentioned earlier, those are more likely to drop vehicle components at higher rates. Now they added that if you don't want to do any particular types of content. So for example, like if you don't want to go to shipwrecks because you hate the fact that there could be PvP there, you are still able to trade for those components that you might be after with other players, as the game does have a marketplace or this auction house that you can freely trade with others, exchanging currency for whatever items you're looking for. Now, while at the shipwreck, the player comes across...
Okay, so we're not forced to do the PvP things if you're not into it. And welcome in, Dennis. I've played so many MMOs, and the ones with PvPs had high levels waiting for new players getting out of the tutorial zones. I don't get that kind of behavior, but this PvP thing, waiting for people coming out of the tutorial zone, is kind of like lifted if you have specific PvP zones where you go in prepared and geared and ready and expecting PvP combat. That's a different premise than having just overall open PvP and people preying upon the weak ones or preying upon the ones who just come out of the tutorial zone, as you say. I don't get the irk about it. I don't get the fun about it. I personally think it's a dick move to go after people who are not at your level and just, live your power fantasy of, I have defeated this player and he's gonna complain about whatnot. Well, welcome back, Godzilla.
Much harder enemies, these being from the Slaver faction. They use a lot more range.
Seeing how the sword animations look like, I'm actually now tempted to go rather into either psychic abilities or range, as it looks quite janky.
Weaponry than some of the other factions, as well as tossing these grenades that lock you in place, making you exposing you to their fire. Basically, it's here that he fights a couple of heavies as well, which are basically like elites in the game. They've got more health and deal more damage than the normal variants. These particular ones wielding this LMG type weapon, and they also have this AoE pushback that stuns players if they get too close. After clearing a few enemies and collecting some loot, they then jump back in the Ornithopter and leave Haga Basin, heading into the overland map. And this is the first time we actually see that transition as to how it works. You basically fly towards the edge of the map, the barrier, the exterior of Haga Basin, and you just load into this top-down overhead map. And this is how you head to the other, quote, maps or the other zones that are in.
This is actually a nice way of implementing new areas, of expanding on your known world, and also easily implements new maps and new regions into it. Now looking at Conan Exiles, where they had the Shroud Isles, or whatever it's called, Isles of Ipta. No, I forgot the name. That DLC could then implement it into your ongoing session instead of having to recreate a new server running that specific map. We could have now just multiple maps and points of interest and locations to travel to based on this fast travel shenanigans. Sipta, thank you, Kami. It's also directly tied to their server technology. Oh, that's cool. That's cool. But I'm very curious on what kind of server approach we'll get, but maybe we'll find some information during this video, because G-Portal, my partner, has reached out to me that we can already pre-order server setups for Dune Awakening, and I was a little bit confused. Probably they were a little bit too early or too hasty with that, or they have information that we don't have yet and have concluded some deals with Funcom behind the scenes. Could also be a thing. But the spies must flow. Clocko, how you doing? Welcome in, my dear hairy friend. I was wondering what the fuck I did that. Every time I see Clocko and his Chewbacca emotes, I have to do, I don't know, Wookiee sounds. I'm intrigued to see what kind of server tech we'll get and what kind of things we could set up. As mentioned earlier, and I will say it again, if we get to make our own servers, I am willing to plan 3 approaches. One that will be for the community. One that would be specifically for content creators. And since there's PvP zones and whatnot, I don't think we need a specific PvP server, but maybe a third one that is then heavily on player versus players emphasis that will, I don't know, reset every 6 months so people can start anew and have the chance again to do better next time, unless they make a living, thriving world that shifts and expands and whatnot. But yeah, let's keep on watching to the end. Exactly.
In the game. So as of now, there are 4 of these. It's Haga Basin, which is the starting area that's said to be roughly 80 to 100 hours worth of content, apparently. After that, the second actual playable zone is the Deep Desert, which is much larger than Haga Basin, about 9 times its size. This is where the endgame PvP and spice harvesting happens.
9
and then
times
finally,
size.
there are the major cities for the game's 2 main factions. This is Harko City and Arakin City, and this is where you engage with the faction system, as well as having having trade NPCs, seeing other players, having the auction house, etc. Now, they're going to be adding more maps or zones in the future, but those four, the Haga Basin, the Deep Desert, and the two faction cities, those are the four that the game is going to be launching with. They then fly to Harko Village and give us a little sneak peek for about a minute before ending the live gameplay preview section of the stream. Now, after this, they moved into talking about the game's music and audio. This was like 15 or 20 minutes worth of time. I appreciate good music, but really not a whole lot to say about this section here personally. If you are interested, though, I suggest watching it yourself. They did release a video specifically going over the process of how they went about creating music for the game, which is, again, interesting if you care. Next, they went into discussion of the game's business model.
That's a very subtle way to say that. I don't give a fuck. Is Zendaya in this? I don't think so, Clocko. It is not based on the movies. It's its own alternative pathway. When you see the trailer, it's showcasing that specific events that during the books and also during the movies that happen don't happen, and it's kind of like a what if scenario, and it is based on the movies. You 100% on that? That is based on the movies and not on a combination of all. But yeah, it's definitely an alternate history path of what would happen if. So it's a what if scenario, to be kind of free in terms of how they can expand on the story, how they can implement certain events, so they don't have to backtrack and check with book and movie and kind of be on the lore part, but be also free in terms of creation. With stuff that makes sense. Unless Funcom lied, they lied. I don't know. I am not 100% one-to-one, toe-to-toe with everything they've said. I have it somewhere in the back of my hands, thinking that they said that it's heavily inspired by the movies and the books. Or it's heavily inspired by the movies, but they try to make it as lore accurate using the books or something like that. But yeah. Yeah. The art direction and a lot of builders and structures and vehicles are very one on par with it. Seems the game getting released while they be busy with renovation in my apartments. Oh,
no. And post-launch plans. And there's something I want to talk about here. So the bullet point info is that the game isn't launching into early access. I've seen a lot of confusion about this. I think that's why they brought it up, because it seems like...
Okay. So we're going to have 3 editions: Standard Edition, Deluxe, and Ultimate. There's going to be a Season Pass. Okay. Sir Docker Bater Armor. Palace Building Set, Dune 2021 Film Still Suit, Digital Artbook, Digital Soundtrack, Blue Dasher Ornithopter Swatch, Dusk Rider Sandbank Swatch. That sounds like some cosmetical things. Besides that, I think the most interesting one will be the one including the Season Pass already. Giving all the DLC content, I guess. I don't know. They started with these weird seasons as well in Conan Exiles. We'll see about it. The delayed release thingy, is it coming out later than expected? Pre-order rewards. Head Start not included in Standard Edition. I find this such a dick move to hide it behind a paywall to play the game earlier than everybody else.
People were confused. It's a full-on release, not an early access release. They said there's going to be no monthly subscription. It's just $1 price up front. They are planning to have regular free updates that include new content, areas, features, and quality of life improvements. And they will also be selling, quote, optional DLCs, although they gave exactly zero clarity as to exactly what will be included in those. We'll have to wait and see. If I were to guess, it's going to be similar to what they do in their prior survival game, Conan Exiles. I would expect pretty much exactly what they do there. there. They're going to be selling seasonal passes. This is going to be specifically giving you access to several of the DLCs at a single purchase price, or you can pay for these DLCs as standalone one-off purchases. Now, one big thing though is some of the editions of the game that they're selling are going to include a 5-day head start beginning on May the 15th. Now, of this, Joel said, sure, this allows people to get in the game early, but it also helps us to make sure we can balance the server load as people come into the game for launch for the best possible experience. And players who want the...
Joe, I do like you, but that is complete utter nonsense. Why not have a stress test before release and have people who purchase the game give access to the game step by step and have like wave of invites of accessibility towards the game instead of hiding it behind a paid feature? I know from a marketing perspective, you're making more money out of it if you hide it behind. Let's give people more access if they buy the bigger perk package of our game.
Fresh start experience will be able to play on new servers, which will launch when the game launches on the 20th of May. And while I appreciate him saying this, what this obviously neglects, though, discussing is the entire end game and the deep desert, which isn't separate. This is where all the late game progression happens, and this is where the large scale PvP is going to take place. And from what they have said on several occasions, this is a single server for all intents and purposes. It is one massive play space that everybody shares. There is no
fingers crossed, both hands crossed, and my toes that I'm not going to show on camera crossed that they have the coin and the server capacity for this idea to work smoothly and lag free. If that becomes a lag fest, all this idea of massive combat, Panavision feed cam when go to only Vikings.
phasing, there's no picking from a list of different server instances, nothing. If 200 players all decide to go and stand on one particular specific location in the deep desert, all of those players will always see each other, no matter what version of Haga Basin they were in before they went to the deep desert, because the Haga Basin and the deep desert are separate things. Haga Basin is instance with player limits of around 40 people, but the deep desert is one massive shared space that every...
So Haga Basin is player limits. I wonder, can you invite people to your Haga Basin if you are friends? Can you invite people into your Haga Basin if you make a guild? Can you claim a complete Haga Basin only for your own if the guild becomes big enough? And then what is the limitation of player groups and guilds? I'm curious if that is the thing. Haga Basin equals your server. So if you play on your local thing, do you like create your local server when you go into Haga Basin? Interesting. And then does your local server connect to their PvP server when you go into the big world? If you go by their earlier games, I see yes to you. Okay. It's not local. Okay. It's always hosted. Okay. How if you log in, it'll try to add you into an instance other guildmates are in already. It's always hosted. Okay, it's not local. Fair enough. Fair enough.
Single person who travels from whatever version of Haga Basin that they were in, they're all going to the same area. So what this means is that there are no separate servers for Deep Desert. Even if you're starting on the real launch date, the non-early access launch date, you're going to have maybe your different iteration of Haga Basin. But when you reach the Deep Desert, you're going to be playing with the people who had the head start. So when they talk about people joining launch day servers, that only applies to the beginning of the game, the first half of the game, the Haga Basin. That zone, yes, it does have its separate instances, but when people eventually leave Haga Basin, when they make their ornithopter and they head out into the deep desert, everyone's going to the same play space. So that said, players who get a 5-day head start, are going to have a huge advantage in the fact that they're going to be reaching the deep desert quicker, they're going to be gearing up faster, they're going to be getting to higher levels, and they're going to be getting those end game vehicles, which all gives them power for fighting over harvesting spice, which is what everyone else is going to be competing over. We're going to be competing in the same region over the same spice blows, and that spice is like that's the ultimate end game currency that everyone's going to be fighting for. Spice is what you are after, and it plays directly into character power progression, which means that the players who start 5 days later and they eventually reach the deep desert, they're going to be at a big disadvantage. They're going to be way behind, and that could be a total mess. That is
Can we please have a stress test and then have a complete wipe after full launch is happening for everybody? Thank you.
Unless everything that they've said before isn't true and there are separate servers for the deep desert. But from what they have said on numerous occasions, including an interview that I had when I spoke directly with Joel Bylos, the game's head himself, I spoke to him, and the way he explained it is that no, they're not separate. And if that is in fact true, that means that the Head Start players will get a big advantage when it comes to controlling the end game and prepping for the end game and getting in a stronger position. And if all of that is gonna function the way it's been explained and I expect it to, that's entirely lame, and that just sucks. People are literally going to pay to be able to get ahead, and then they're going to get in the deep desert. They're going to be higher level with better gear, with better equipped vehicles. They're going to be putting weaponry on their vehicles, and any people who walk into that PvP space 5 days later will get smashed, right? Like they're I don't understand how they're not going to get absolutely steamrolled, but I guess we'll see. In the stream, they showcase the different pre-order editions. There's 3 of them. You got Standard, Deluxe, and the Ultimate option. Those 2 higher, more expensive editions will include that early access, as well as the season pass, a bunch of cosmetics, and some.
I'm actually curious. Do we have them on Steam already? The different price range. Dune Awakening. So Deluxe Edition, 70 euros. Ultimate Edition, 90 euros. Standard, 50 euros. Okay, 50 is an okay price for a new upcoming game. But it kind of like the whole premise is like pushing you towards buying the higher purchase package just to get 5 days ahead into the game. That's such a marketing dig move, if you ask me. But what does our partners say at Instant Gaming? Do we have already Dune Awakening things in here? Dune Awakening. Not there yet, but you can be notified if pre-orders open. So feel free to click the link over here and click on get notified by emails when this opens up, because I'm very much thinking that we're going to get a good deal from our sponsor for you guys for, watching this. Over here. Let's continue.
Some other bonus junk. I just like this stuff. It's basically industry standard at this point, especially for these live service games. Still, regardless, I do not like it. Now, the final segment of the stream was a Q&A. I'm just going to rapid fire give you some of the answers that they gave. We learned that the game is going to have proximity chat, so you can speak with other players that you come across.
Yes, please. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to reach out to all kinds of creators and see if we can build up a nice group of people. I would like to have some sort of roleplay premise to, try to emphasize a specific role or character and play together as content creator. Will be difficult though if the whole spiel and shenanigans happening with the deep desert, but it's a wild idea. We'll see.
In the world, it's disabled by default, but you can manually enable it. I understand why they disabled it by default, because boy, you get open mics on by default. Some people are going to run into some interesting vocabulary when they first start playing these games. So I think it's smart that they started out with it disabled.
Started to create a Spice Cartel already? Yes, Cloco. We're going to set up server in categories and whatnot in our Discords very soon. To be fair, unless you're not you're no lifting it, I think the 5 days delay is pretty much inconsequential. No lifing it. Yeah. Probably those who are gonna no life it will anyways be ahead of those who are getting the 5 days head start. But there could be groups of people dedicated to PvPing that will together as a group jump in a head start and try to secure their position there. Especially I could imagine also firms and companies who are on the direction of, hey, I'm gonna sell you in-game loot for real money. China farmers and whatnot. I could see people popping in there. Elon Musk SpaceX program will be in there, claiming a big bunch of the territory. And if you want that specific resource, you'll have to buy a Tesla. Otherwise, you not have access to it. And only if you have your Tesla membership that you have to pay monthly as well, you will be able to access their base. So there's many things that can be going wrong with that.
Controller support at release. They even fact
100%
said it was built
Panda,
with controller
100%.
in mind. You can solo everything in the game, at least about 99.9% of it, they said. Although certain activities like harvest.
You can solo everything? What's the reason then for dungeons and whatnot? Like, should be dungeons specifically to come together with people? And if you want to solo it, then I don't know, maybe give you the chance to hire NPCs that come with you as mercenaries and act as players. But we'll see.
Harvesting large spice blows will be
Let me theorize, Attila!
much harder as they require multiple vehicles. So you could technically do it, but it's going to be very difficult. The deep desert, they said, is 576 square kilometers. As mentioned, it's 9 times the size of Haga Basin, and Haga Basin itself is roughly 8,200 hours worth of content, according to the dev. The deep desert uses server meshing, where it's basically broken up into different regions, and you seamlessly travel from one server to another as you move through the different areas. As you go from like south to north, you're going to be just seamlessly moving into the different servers.
At this point, I'm just hoping it won't be a laggy mess. If they don't have a good server provider or a good server backup, this will be a laggy shithole and unplayable.
But it's all meshed together and it's one big play space. For practicality purposes, it is one large area that everyone shares simultaneously. They said Haga Basin is not full PvP, just those particular spaces like the shipwrecks. Full PvP is confined to the deep desert. I will note though, you come into the deep desert from the south and the initial region is PvE only.
All I can say, Attila, is launch of Conan Exiles.
And then you cross a threshold, and then it's full PvP for like 95% of the surface area of the deep desert. But there's an initial area where you're safe, like when you first load in, and you got a little bit of buffer space there. Player bases do have decay mechanics, so as long as
we get decay mechanics again,
shielded and as such protected from sandstorms that come by. But if left unpowered, it decays over time, eventually being destroyed by said sandstorms. Now they did.
It was in early access too. Yeah, it was in early access, but I mean, when the game became available, it was a shit show in terms of lagging, server performance. It was, and it was server limited to, I think, 40 players or something like that. So here we are talking about big player numbers, scales, and whatnot. So we'll see.
Did say you can pretty easily fuel your base for weeks at a time, roughly.
And this one shall be launched fully, not in early access. So I expect good server performance.
21 days is the limit before needing to have to log back in to refuel it. They also said you can build a base mostly anywhere. The only real exceptions are you can't build right next to or on top of any major points of interest. So you can't build a base inside of a stronghold or a trading post or a testing station, etc. But pretty much anywhere else around the world, you can place down a plot and build a base. Ornithopters can be equipped with rocket launchers. This is likely going to play a big role in the guild versus guild deep desert battles that take place. space. They even mentioned the fact that you can sit inside of vehicles and shoot out of them, or you can stand on top of vehicles and shoot your ranged weapons as they move around. Basically, your feet will be like magnetized to the top surface. So you can basically make like a battle bus of you and your mates rolling around shooting stuff. There's going to be a bunch of different types of vehicles with different sizes and capabilities, and these vehicles will be modular, so you can build different components to them as well. They said Dune will be coming to consoles, but no details as of when. Currently, private servers are something that might come in the future, but won't be there at release. They are planning to have new DLC updates every 3 to 4 months. Again, expect these to be...
I wonder how private servers will work in terms of this whole deep desert shebang. But I guess we find out later when the time has come for that.
Similar to how they work in Conan Exiles. It's not full loot PvP, but if you die in PvP, you lose durability as well as any spice and resources you were carrying. And then finally, they said that the max guild size is 32 players.
32 players for guilds? Okay.
And that is pretty much it. That's basically everything in the 2-hour live stream condensed into whatever this like 30-minute video that we have here. Overall, I gotta say, I like it. This was a great update. Lots of cool stuff in here. In particular, I love seeing more varied points of interest. I love the attacking of enemy strongholds. The crashed ships were cool, and the fact that there's PvP there is even cooler. And I loved that massive canyon and all of its underground layers. Like, I'm really looking forward to exploring these kinds of spaces. Yeah, the combat still looks janky, absolutely. I hope, but am not expecting them to improve this much, if at all, prior to launch. I just think it's something that I've come to accept with most survival games. The combat isn't the best in the gaming industry, but in spite of that, I still really enjoy the genre, and I'm hoping that continues to be the case here. Lastly, though, I will say, I think this paid early access stuff absolutely sucks, and unless it works differently from how they've explained it, it's going to be a massive advantage for people to dominate the endgame deep desert. Players who start late are going to be entering into this endgame region, and they will 100% be getting rolled by people who had a 5-day head start on leveling, on gearing, on getting new skills, and on equipping and maxing out their vehicles.
I have a feeling that in the 5 days, they will not be able to reach the deep desert. If they see that gaming time in Haga Basin is around roughly 80 hours, from what I've heard. So I could imagine that people will have a hard time to come and get into the deep desert, but that kind of like time interference will definitely give some advantage. If it's actually really powerful advantage, we'll see. Trust me, they will reach deep desert in 5 days, probably. Probably. Just no lifing it in front, sleeping in front of the computer, putting a toilet under your seat. But yeah, in the future, they will need more PvE deep desert zones. We'll see. We'll see. Probably, maybe, but I guess not. But you can get any resources from the market as well, Dragon Lady. So you're not necessarily forced to go into the deep desert. You can buy them with in-game currency by doing other things. But yeah, I think it's fine. I have no ambition towards deep desert goals. We can just use our own Haga to gather ourselves first, learn the game, etc. There's 4 of us. Let's have no illusions on what we can and cannot achieve. Well, so far it's 4 from who have spread interests of that. There is a role that you can claim in the Discords for Dune if you want to. Make sure to go into the channel. Community roles and pick Dune if you want to get pinged as soon as we have the Discord channels set up and whatnot. I'm also gonna actively seek for an let's call him officer of coordination, somebody who's the right head man and helps me plan this and helps me organize the people and helps me lead the whole project, because I am not 100% able to do a guild lead in the position right now, as in, planning for streams, etc., etc. But Dune Awakening will definitely become a good part of our streams in the future, hitting May 20th when it's happening. Oh, by the way, today is 1st of April, so I just noticed. Don't believe anything you hear today. So I go build a pretty base while you go wild and fight. Something like that, Dragon Lady. Yeah. If there's 20 of us at some point, we can start thinking of more serious organizations, but I'm not expecting a Christmas miracle. Yeah, me neither. Me neither. We need flowers in glass bowls and fishes in them. Fishes in glass bowls. Oh, yeah. Goldfish. For those watching this on YouTube, let me know in the comments down below. What do you think of the whole premise? Let me know if you would be interested to team up and join the shenanigan. And link to Discord and live stream is in the descriptions down below. Big thanks to our creator over here who has put this summary together, Force Gaming. Please do make sure that you like his video. It will be also in the description down below, also here in the live chat. Throw it a thumbs up, leave a nice comment down below, and see. Thank you for summarizing it together. I'll write it down here as well. Big thanks to you for giving us this nice summary. We have been just watching it live over here. We'd love to team up as well for it. If you are down for it, please do poke me via a DM. All the best, and may the spice flow. Who knows? Maybe Force Gaming and I will team up. Will be cool. He's an NA. Well, fuck then.